thank you for inviting us both. I'm speak on behalf of Gabriel. We're really pleased to be here. For those of you that don't know, this is Gabriel Eichsteller. He's a colleague of mine. We work really closely together. He is part of THEMPRA, an organisation in the UK that has been helping develop social pedagogy and social pedagogy practice. And we work very closely on developing a BA course at the University of Central Lancashire and now our Masters in Social Pedagogy Leadership.
Hi, yeah. Are you happy to go next, Lewis?
Yeah.
I will bring on the next slide then.
Okay, so we're going to tell you a little bit before we start talking about social pedagogy. We thought it'd be good to put social work in context, because there isn't a profession of social pedagogues here in the UK. So we thought we would kind of give you a little bit of explanation around how social work works here in the UK and how social pedagogy is fitting with that. So here in the UK, for the last 12 years, we've had the Conservative government in power, and they've had an agenda around austerity measures, which means that we've seen a reducing of public spending on welfare services like social work, health, housing, drug and alcohol use, all kinds of public services. And this has led to high rates of inequality, unfortunately, and there's real challenges for the social work profession and social care professions here in the UK. People supporting people and families that are living in quite high levels of poverty. And there was some really interesting research recently published by the University of Sheffield and the University of Huddersfield here that showed that if you are living in the most deprived areas, the poorest areas here in the UK, then you're 10 times more likely to end up having a social worker. So more than likely a teacher is going to be very worried about your children. They will report that concern to a social worker, and the social worker will come out and investigate what's happening in your family. However, because there isn't a lot of money, thresholds for receiving support from social workers have got a lot higher. So it means that lots of these families, even though they're assessed and there's concerns and worries about them, they don't then get any help. And so we leave families quite angry, disillusioned and upset by that. So it's not a great, I think it's fair to say that social work is very challenging and very difficult at the minute here in the UK. And this is because we've been using new public management as a system. So about 25 years ago, new public management came into force, and this is where all public services have had to look at kind of outcomes. So they've been very outcomes focused. So they set a target, and it doesn't matter whether that relates to the families that you're working with, you've got to try and get them to meet that target. It's very much a lack of trust in the profession. So there's been managers who have been brought in lots of times. Managers don't have social work experience, and they're just there to manage teams and make sure they meet the outcomes. And markets, a lot of private organisations, particularly in adult social care and children's fostering and adoption and children's residential homes, we've seen a really big growth of private organisations taking over the running of these services and making vast amounts of profit, which is not then put back into public services. So we've seen a real movement of money away from supporting people. Gabriel, do you want to move on to the next slide? And new public management has a lot of challenges. So it means that now social work has become very dehumanised. So we're not interested in people, families, children. What we're interested in is just moving people through a formal system. So they get assessed, and then we decide if we can help them. And then if we can help them, they're forced to kind of work through a system. It's very slow to learn and adapt. So the pandemic showed us here in the UK our formal public services were very slow to adapt, and the ones that could adapt to the pandemic were ones that were already trying to work in much more human ways. It also means that we've got this real disconnect between services. So it means that education works in this area, housing in this area, drug and alcohol's in this, and there's no overlap or very little overlap between the services, and it's constantly about money. So this wastes a lot of resources, it isn't helping anybody, and lots of organisations spend a lot of their time trying to get funding or meeting funding outcomes. And it also creates a fantasy world. So it means that the systems that we are forcing social workers to work in doesn't reflect the reality of the work that they're doing. So like I say, there's this real disconnect. Sadly, here in the UK, I think the average working career of a social worker is about 8 years, and it's probably dropping quite considerably. In social care, we have masses of people leaving the profession, and people are struggling to find new people to come in because the pay is very low and the expectations are very high. So people are getting morally burnt out, and we talk a lot in UK about moral distress and burnout. So sadly, social work is not in a great position at this moment. So again, we're working in real complex environments, which means, as you will all know, as human beings, we're very complex, and there isn't one outcome that fixes a problem. So if somebody is homeless, then just providing them a house isn't necessarily going to be the best solution. There might be lots of other issues that go along with that. But here, because of new public management, we've been forced to kind of do A and believe that we will get to B, that we will have this linear outcome. And actually what we're seeing is that this is much more complex. So for us here in the UK, social pedagogy helps offer us a perspective that helps us manage this complexity. It helps us work out how we can stop kind of forcing people through a system, and it's reconnecting people to their moral purpose. So social workers that are coming across social pedagogy through the training and the development that we're doing with people like Gabriel and Thempra, they talk to us about how they feel reconnected to why they came into the job. They're starting to reconnect and understand the moral purpose of the job is to help people, is to get to know people, is to help them feel empowered and able to manage the world around them. And sadly, it's not been recognised as a profession as such, but there's definitely increased growing and increased network of people that are using social pedagogical practice here in the UK. And it's very much within social work and social care organisations.
Yeah, and I think when you look at that picture, you can also see, like, when we open that door and we recognize that the world is complex and that people are struggling because of a multitude of compounding issues and challenges they're facing, then it seems kind of inhumane to just close the door and pretend that that isn't happening. So I think a lot of organizations have started to kind of wonder about, like, how can we accompany people in this messiness? And one of the key quotes that we often talk to with people about is this Maya Angelou quote. And she once said that, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And I think that's borne out time and again in practice, in that we have that power individually through the way we connect with people to change things with the other person, to make them feel more positive, more hopeful for the future. One example that we have that really highlights that is from a local authority in the north of England, and it's about a homeless person who had accumulated more than 300 offences over 30 years in his life. And time and time again, the local authority had tried to find him a home, find him accommodation, because he was homeless, right? And it didn't lead to any results. It took one caseworker, just one caseworker, who was eager to sit down with him and to understand his life and his priorities, which were actually very different. His priorities were to get dental treatment, first of all. The second priority was to get a better sleeping bag. The third priority was to get a bicycle. And so instead of just assessing that he needed accommodation, they tried to really understand what was going on for him, what was important, what would improve his quality of life according to him, rather than according to what they thought was needed. And as a result, that person has stopped offending and has started to seek help for his addiction issues. He has more hope for a positive future, and he's taking things one small step at a time. Things aren't going to change overnight. He's not going to miraculously recover from everything that he's experienced, but it shows that why it's fundamental to start from a position of recognizing the human being and seeing people as more than just the sum of their needs, and why we need to believe in them. And I think in the UK, social pedagogy has kind of given people that kind of conceptual and ethical framework that really helps them articulate it. And that puts that focus on learning with the other person, on well-being in a much more holistic sense, not just about averting adversity, stopping bad things from happening to people, but actually looking at what would facilitate somebody's well-being. And also looking at social inclusion and social justice through relationship-centered practice. So to look at how can we get that homeless person, for instance, meaningfully involved in a community that he's never been part of. Who might that community be, and how can we achieve that? So social pedagogy, from our perspective, very much places the emphasis on understanding, on being alongside the other person, on doing things with them rather than to them. It's focused on being curious about what's meaningful for them and going at their pace. However slow that might be, however long it might take, it needs to be at their pace. It needs to be holistic. It needs to be grounded in a clear sense of ethical purpose of like, why are we doing this? And it needs to start in that person's life world, in what's happening in their lives. And we have the power to help other people change their circumstances and transform their lives, whatever that means for them, if we focus on building trusting relationships, if we're supporting their holistic well-being and their social inclusion. So social pedagogy is very much about how we might do that and why we might do that. And in our role to help practitioners reconnect with that sense of value and purpose. So when we talk about well-being, learning, and social inclusion, we just want to highlight a few things that kind of probably characterize the way we've been developing social pedagogy in the UK, where we've placed the emphasis. So around well-being, we've got this notion of the diamond model, this metaphor that focuses on the richness, the inherent potential, the unique resourcefulness that is inherent in every single person. And our role as practitioners is to help draw that out, to help bring out that sparkly, shiny side and give people that sense of there's something rich and alive in every person. You can be more than just the sum of your negative experiences in life. We very much draw on the analogy as well of gardening rather than sculpting. So gardening is very much about creating the conditions for people to thrive rather than just shaping them in the image that we have, like a sculpture might shape whatever artwork he or she is creating. So it's about what can we do to create a nurturing environment. How can we kind of be really connected to our own ethics in this? How can we make sure that we do things for an ethical reason rather than because the policy says so, or our procedures dictate that we need to do this, that, or the other. And so we need to take collective responsibility to really humanize practice, to engage person to person and focus on relationships and on holistic well-being. And that's the thing that's really in every individual's gift. Everybody, every one of us has this opportunity to encounter other people and give them that sense that we see the genuine human being and that we don't just see them as a case or as a client or service user or whichever label we use.
And just interrupt, sorry, Gabriel, I think what we find as well is that one of the most important things is that people feel that connection back to the ethics of their practice. So understanding, you know, when something doesn't feel right, why is this not feeling right? And it's often because they're being asked to do things that goes against what they believe is their professional and moral and personal values. And connect people back to that, I think, is really powerful and helps them think about how they might work in a different way that places relationships right at the heart of what they're doing.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Lois. The next part that's always very important to us in social pedagogy is very much around learning and how can we engage with people with this intention to understand rather than to impose our own knowledge. So there's a shift in how we see our role, and the focus is very much on learning together. And that's born out of the insight that in complex situations, knowledge comes from learning together with others, from making sense of situations by sharing perspectives and seeing, like, what are you experiencing in, you know, the 24 hours every day that you live your life? What am I seeing in the 2 hours a week that I might be supporting you? What is your neighbor seeing? What are other people noticing as part of that? So it's about that learning together that's really key. And so learning is very much fundamental. Very often we come across this notion that, oh, we haven't got time to learn, we haven't got time to reflect, it's a luxury we can't afford. But really, in complex situations, it's the only way we can move forward. So if we don't take the time to learn, then we're just chasing our own tails, as we like to say. So the focus needs to be very much on emergent learning. So not just replicating what we already know, but actually to notice what is happening, from trying things out, from testing, from reflecting on that and further improving. So the path kind of emerges as we walk it. And the more we walk it, the clearer we see. And that means that the aim is not to just replicate what we've done before or replicate what's worked elsewhere, but to actually use the learning from what we've done before or from what has worked elsewhere to give ourselves that sense of there are many creative possibilities in which many creative ways in which we can support different people, and we can respond to the uniqueness of their situation because we have all this wealth of knowledge and ideas for how we can do things.
And I think, oh, go on, sorry, you've got one more point.
Yeah, just one more. So that requires an organization where we enjoy a sense of psychological safety, where we feel free and encouraged to try things out, and where it's okay to make mistakes, where we have this positive error culture, because mistakes are seen as learning opportunities.
And I think for social work in particular, the focus on learning is really important, and that's the thing that sets it apart, social pedagogy apart from social work, and brings a really important aspect, like Gabriel's just said. I think in social work practice, learning is something that's seen as just training or continual professional development, something that happens at university or in a training session. But actually, if you want to work in a social pedagogical way with people, then learning is fundamental, like Gabriel said, and it is that being able to feel confident enough to try something and give it a go and keep learning, because when you work with human beings, whether they're children or families or adults, then you're always learning something. Every situation is always different. So it's about using the theories that you know and you have as navigation points to think about the practice and the doing part of the job.
Yeah. And that learning also includes this notion of how can we actually learn to live together with others? How can we learn to be part of a community? So social inclusion and enabling people to learn about what might that mean? What does it feel like to have supportive relationships? What does it feel like compared to relationships that might be more abusive or more traumatic for whatever reason? And so our role is also very much about facilitating and helping people recognize what positive relationships mean, what they look like. So we're also responsible in some sense for helping people curate their relational universe. So to look at not just what is my relationship with the person I support, but actually also what is their relationship with, you know, their children, their partner, their family members, their neighbors, the wider community, their friends, other professionals. And what can I do in my capacity to kind of help them develop a rich, a more constructive relational universe in that sense? How can we help people get that sense of balance, that sense of equilibrium, of things being in constant movement, of course, but actually things still kind of feeling like I'm not just being pulled everywhere all the time and have lost my sense of direction, but actually I'm enjoying that kind of interplay, those constellations. So a lot of that is really about helping people gain a sense of meaningful belonging in whichever community they wish to be part of, and what we can do to facilitate that. And very often in that context, we talk about this notion of bonding and bridging. So the bridging being about knowing what services are available in the community, in the local community, and the bonding being about kind of helping people make those connections to, say, a support group that might make them feel included, or a daycare center where they feel less lonely because they're enjoying meeting people there that have a similar interest. But importantly, that we don't just leave it to an individual to make those connections, but that we're journeying alongside them, that we might come along to a meeting. And I remember just recently I was in Bradford talking to social workers there, and we had noticed just by accident that there was a Syrian restaurant down the corner from the council office where they offer a coffee morning for women with a refugee background. And the social worker there was like, oh, this is brilliant. I love finding out about this. I know exactly who I'm going to take there for my next meeting with her. And so it's about seeing those opportunities to kind of help people make meaningful connections with others in their community that can then kind of be part of their relational universe. And so at a meta level, that's very much also about promoting social justice and human rights and giving people that sense of we're actually there to support their human rights, to live in dignity, and to get that sense of belonging. And we're trying to address the social inequalities that they're suffering from. We're not just redirecting them to deal with those issues themselves.
And I think, again, the interdependence. So I think in social work here in Britain, for a long time, it's been about supporting people to become independent. And we use the word independent all the time. So if you're working with children, you know, and families, then they've got to become independent and have the skills to care for their children. You know, I worked as a leaving care social worker with 16-year-olds that have been in the care system. And we were always talking about independent living skills. And I think social pedagogy is really important because it reminds us that none of us are independent. We are all interdependent on one another, and we have these connections. And like Gabriel says, that meaningful belonging is really, really important. So it's about building up relationships with people so that we can understand where their sense of belonging might be and help them develop that so that they don't need our support anymore. And when things get difficult in their lives, they've got people, that network of support around them, and they know where to go for some informal help.
Indeed. So Lois, over to you to tell us a little bit more about social pedagogy developments in the UK. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all the organizations that have been actively exploring social pedagogy in practice. I think it goes some way to show that the interest has been quite rich and quite diverse, with different organizations trying out different aspects of social pedagogy.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, in a way, we're very jealous of countries like yours that have a social pedagogue profession, because we don't have it here. And so there are positives and negatives to this. But what you can see from this map is that there is a growing network of people. And I think it's because things are so difficult here, and things are not likely to get any better under our current government with regards to the cost of living crisis, that, you know, there's a global crisis happening. That people are looking for other ways of working, and they're realising that new public management and this just forcing people, families in particular, through systems doesn't work. So you can see here that we've got this growing, developing movement of people across public services. And these are people that work with children, with families, with young adults and older adults. We've got a real variety of organisations, and these include social care. So these might be organisations that work with older adults. We've got social workers, social work departments that are very interested in using social pedagogy. We've got charities and voluntary organisations, as well as local authorities. And I think here in the UK, there's a real sense of trying to find something different that gets us back to the roots of the work, of social work's values and the moral purpose of the work that we should be doing. And, you know, everybody's beginning to realise, I think the pandemic made everybody realise just how connected we are, but also how complex things can be and how difficult it can be. And there isn't always just one answer to a social issue. So we've all got to work much more together. So it's really bringing people together. The social pedagogy networks and connecting people up are really bringing people together, and they're realising that there are different ways of working. So the social pedagogue network is very much about sharing good practice, connecting people up, again, building those relationships and having a sense of meaningful belonging when you are a practitioner, I think is really important. So you can feel that you are, you know, helping people. And sometimes it's really simple things. So for instance, one of the local authorities that Gabriel in particular has done some work with, which is up in the northeast, has changed just something very small in their practice, which is instead of sending out letters to remind people that they need to pay a certain bill, that they would pick up the telephone and somebody will have a human conversation with that person, and then they find out a little bit more about what's happening. And that's had some really positive results where families are being helped in a much more positive way instead of just being sent a letter telling them that they're doing something wrong. So social pedagogy is really helpful in getting people to think about how they respond to social issues in a very different way. We also have the Social Pedagogue Development Network, which is really a brilliant network. And this is a community of practice. So this is where we get together. We have Thempra kindly organised these free online events, and we get together and we discuss different topics and different issues. We share areas of good practice, but it's also about connecting up as well and building up these relationships. And also, this also is important to get a little bit political. I think it's really important for us here in the UK because of Brexit. So we are part of the global alliance as well that we're developing. And I think this is really, really important because we've stepped out of Europe and there are positives and negatives to that. And I think we're finding there's far more negatives. So having those formal connections in other ways are really, really important. And I think for us here in the UK, it's a really great opportunity to carry on learning much more about social pedagogy, about thinking about how we develop practice here, but also sharing some of our learning here as well. And I think the one thing I would really love to leave with you all from our experiences here in the UK is that just how precious social pedagogy practice is, and that you really need to cherish that and be really proud of it and keep hold of that. I know that in lots of countries it's kind of taken for granted, or maybe it's being questioned about whether how valuable it is. And it is really, really valuable. You know, like I say, we're very jealous sometimes that we don't have social pedagogue professionals here in the UK, but we can really see the value of it. If you move away from putting relationships and people at the heart of everything you do, then the work that you do has less impact and is not as good for everybody. It also creates organisations where people burn out and they're morally distressed. They feel a real disconnect with the purpose of the work that they wanted to do. So we think social pedagogy is really, really important. And like I say, if you take one thing away from our talk today, that would be my main point. Have you got anything else to add, Gabriel?
No, thanks. That would be my main point as well. I think as we say here on the slide as well, we warmly invite all of you really to join that growing movement of people and organizations who really believe that social pedagogy can make a difference in the world, that together we can support a more eco-socially just world. So the Global Alliance is very much a free movement where we just bring together people from across the globe to learn with each other, to inspire each other. And it would be lovely if many of you or all of you became part of that as well. So thank you very much.